It's Paul from Managed Systems here, and welcome to episode 2 of our series on how to fix clinical evaluation non-conformities. If you didn't see the first part in the series, I'll put a link to that post in the description below this video. But otherwise, let's get on with episode 2. So, just by way of a recap, non-conformities following submission of a clinical evaluation are quite common under the EU MDR. Basically because the standard for submissions is now so high. But the problem is that resolution of non-conformities is necessary in order for the clinical evaluation to be accepted, but non-conformities can on occasion be quite difficult to interpret, and it may not always be clear how to fully address them. And of course, a failure to resolve non-conformities may lead to a further round of review, which increases your costs, leads to lost time, and of course stress and worry. So the aim of this series is to work through commonly seen non-conformities one at a time, and to dig deep into what they mean and how to solve, or preferably avoid, them in the first place. And the context behind this is to link into general principles for optimal conduct of medical device clinical evaluation. Okay. So, non-conformity number 2, the one we're going to look at is this one. Appraisal of literature articles has not been conducted appropriately. This is one that we see a lot, and in order to explore it and ensure that you don't fall foul of it, we've broken down our approach to this into 3 steps. So first of all, we're going to consider what appraisal actually means, and what purpose it serves within the context of a clinical evaluation. And then we're going to look at the characteristics of an appropriate appraisal framework. And then finally, consider how appraisal should be applied during clinical evaluation. So, what is appraisal? Appraisal is a structured and systematic evaluation of the quality of individual studies within a literature review or a clinical evaluation, and an evaluation of the relevance of each source to the clinical evaluation. It's those 2 factors together that comprise an appraisal. And if it's applied correctly, appraisal enables systematic weighting of study outcomes according to quality and relevance. And we'll look at application of weighting later on in this presentation. But the basic idea is that the better the study and the more relevant it is, the greater weighting is given to its results compared with lower quality studies of lower relevance. And in context, the MedDev guideline 2.7/1 revision 4, although it's generally quite outdated now, it does quite effectively place appraisal into context. So if you recall, MedDev splits clinical evaluation into 4 stages, 0, 1, 2 and 3, and appraisal is stage 2, so it comes after identification of pertinent data and leads into appropriate analysis. And the essence of this is that you can't properly analyze data until you've appraised it. So how do you choose, or how do you design an appraisal framework? Well, the fact is that there is no universally defined appraisal system. There are some appraisal systems that are treated as though they are broadly accepted. So the Oxford scheme is one such example. But often these are a little bit limited. So the Oxford scheme limits itself to consideration of study type, but overlooks a range of other factors that can also have a bearing on how much weight should be given to a study. We'll look at some factors shortly. But there is no universally defined appraisal system, and so the justification for the chosen method is key. You need to explain to the reviewer why you've chosen the method that you have and why you hold it to be appropriate. And ideally, appraisal should consider a range of factors that pertain to study quality and relevance. It shouldn't generally be just one factor or just 1 or 2 factors. The most common pitfall is to do nothing with the appraisal. The overall objective then is to produce an appraisal score for each source, meaning that appraisal actively influences outcomes. It's this appraisal score that becomes a mathematical weighting factor that's applied to results from individual sources. And that's how appraisal gains its expression in the clinical evaluation. Let's think about characteristics of a compliant appraisal framework. Again, there's no universally accepted method, but this is just an example of what an appraisal scheme may consider. Study type is one important consideration. Some types of study are just inherently stronger than others. So a randomized control trial would normally score higher than a cohort study or a case series, for example. Sample size is another important consideration. Larger sample sizes should increase the appraisal score, as a bigger sample size increases reliability of results. Statistics, so this is both the use of statistics and perhaps whether the study showed a statistically significant result. Studies that include properly designed statistics should generally receive a greater weighting than those that don't. Length of follow-up is another factor. Arguably, a longer follow-up can capture more of the clinical journey and therefore increases reliability of the clinical picture that emerges and thereby score. And then it's important to consider the devices that are used within studies. So if it's the subject device itself, then you would expect it to have the highest score. If it's an equivalent device, perhaps a slightly lower score. Similar devices, lower still, or unrelated, lower score. So you can combine all of these factors together to produce a framework. And remember that the key is in the justification, so explaining to the reviewer why you've chosen the appraisal scheme that you have. And this is how it may appear in the protocol, which is where it should be expressed, the appraisal protocol. You may have seen scoring systems similar to this. So it takes, if you look at the left-hand side, it takes the same characteristics, applies a bit of a description, and then a grading, so an alphanumeric score with the highest number relating to the best possible outcome in each, according to each characteristic. So for example, in the study type, if a particular source is a randomized control trial, you'd score it R4. If it's a case series, you'd score it R1. These are just examples. And you can see how that flows through the different characteristics. And so this, again, is just a hypothetical example. These are not real studies, but you can see that you can build a table with the alphanumeric scores that are derived from that scheme. Apply it to each study. And this gives an opportunity for sources to be strong in one area and weak in another, which is another strength of this kind of combined appraisal system, because there is more than one factor that should be considered. It wouldn't be correct to say that all randomized control trials are definitely better than all cohort studies. That's not the case. So having a range of different factors to consider is an advantage. And then to produce the overall appraisal score, you can just add up the numbers in each row. So for Jones et al., you'd add, so it's R3, so you'd take 3 plus 2 plus 1 plus 3 plus 3, and that gives a score of 12. So you can see that the better the study, the greater the appraisal score. And then anyone who's seen the part 1 in this series will be familiar with the next steps. What we've done here is we've got the same study titles on the left hand side, and the appraisal score is taken straight from the table we've just looked at for each one, and we've added an outcome parameter, in this case reduction in pain VAS, which is a way of capturing the level of pain that someone's experiencing. These, again, this is not real data, this is fictional data, just to illustrate the principle. But to get your overall weighted mean, which accounts for the relative appraisal of each source rather than a flat mean, which would ignore it, the first step is to calculate a weighted value. And so you do that by multiplying the actual outcome with the appraisal score for that study. So for Jones et al., it will be 4.5 multiplied by 12, and you do that the same for each source, and you get this range of weighted values. And then the next step is to summate the appraisal scores and also add up the weighted values. So you can see the sum at the bottom of each column there. And to calculate your weighted mean, you take the sum of the weighted values, that's 226.7 in this case, and divide it by the total appraisal score, which is 61 in this case. and that gives you a weighted mean of 3.72. And so that applies mathematically the appraisal that we've conducted to each individual source's results to give greater weighting to better quality studies. And that's the essence of how appraisal is expressed ultimately in a compliant clinical evaluation. So, yes, effective appraisal outcome. Effective appraisal uses systematic methods to evaluate quality and relevance of each individual source. It should consider a range of factors, produces a score, enabling mathematical weighting of results. Importantly, it should be adequately justified and conducted according to a clear plan set out in advance. And it's used in relation to literature for both the subject device and state of the art. So, in summary, non-conformity 2, appraisal of literature articles has not been conducted appropriately. And we've looked at what appraisal is and what purpose it serves. We've considered characteristics of an appropriately conducted appraisal process. And we've looked at how appraisal should be applied during clinical evaluation and the effect it has on outcomes. Don't forget that Mantra Systems offers a comprehensive clinical evaluation service, and one of the most common reasons we're engaged is to help with resolution of non-conformities. All initial conversations are completely free. We have a really friendly team. Give us a call if you need to discuss anything, or send us an email. And thus concludes episode 2 in this non-conformity series. Don't forget to share if you found this post useful, if this video useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next part in the series. Thank you very much.